Hey, Cross Park, several things to alert you to about this coming Sunday. First is this is our final week on the spring schedule, which means we have Sunday school at 9:30 and our worship service at 10:30. That means that next week, June 4th, we will shift to the summer schedule where our service begins at 9:30 and we will not have Sunday school. So come to the last round of Sunday school this week, and then we will see you next week at 9:30 for the service. We have several other things going on in our Sunday service this week. We're going to have the privilege to pray for Spencer and Courtney Johnson. They are moving next week to Durham to their new calling, so we want to pray for them. Also, we will have the chance to hear from our City to City Latin America Vision team about their trip, but maybe more importantly about what they learned, and they've come back and collaborated with our missions team and our elders, and we have some next steps about our partnership that we're really excited to be able to share with you. Now, in terms of our sermon, we are working our way through the playlist for the journey home, and we are going to be in Psalm 122. Psalm 122 is about worship, as you'll see. It's about the excitement, the joy of actually worshiping, arriving in Jerusalem to worship, and all that points us to. So, as I've been doing each week, I'm writing some form of reflection or poem to help me think about the text, and I hope that maybe can help you as well. So I want to read for you my poem that I wrote inspired by Psalm 122. I have intentionally started with longer lines and progressively shortened those lines as we go through the poem to sort of mimic the journey, the sense of going up the mountain, and that as the pilgrim gets excited as he or she is arriving at Jerusalem or at the temple, their pace quickens as they finish. So, in light of all that, let me read for you my poem from Psalm 122. I erupted with joy at the invitation to enter the place of our anticipation, the city that loves to welcome her children, offering wisdom to every pilgrim. Pray for the city, pray for her peace, pray for the safety she grants to each. For my brothers, and for his house, I seek peace. Shalom. Well, again, my hope is that as I work through these reflections, they will do for you what they've done for me. Help to warm your heart and mind up to think about our preaching passage, our teaching passage for this Sunday. As I finish, I wanted to give some personal reflection on the life and death and the ministry of Tim Keller. Tim has profoundly shaped my own pastoral ministry. I never knew him personally, never met him. We weren't friends. And yet, in a pretty significant way, Tim has been shaping for me. And so I wanted to briefly reflect on him. There are tons of tributes and comments out there from people who knew him personally and experienced his ministry in a direct, face-to-face kind of way. That's not my experience. And yet, I have been massively shaped by him. Most of you, if you know Tim Keller at all, you know that he's a serious thinker, a theologian, an apologist, an evangelist, particularly for how to talk about Jesus in the gospel in an increasingly post-Christian world, which we do live in. And so it's been helpful for me to think with Keller's thinking about how to communicate about Jesus in a world that is increasingly disconnected from biblical literacy, disconnected from even the notion of the gospel and what it might mean, and in many cases is hostile to it. Tim showed a remarkable ability to care deeply for skeptics and non-believers, and to really hear their objections and listen to their questions and care about them personally, because he loved people well, and he loved Jesus well, and he wanted people to meet Jesus. I always appreciated Tim Keller's ability to speak about our struggle with sin in a way that neither ended up in the ditch of self-righteous legalism nor in the ditch of despair over change. So it's easy to say our sin is a problem, we need Jesus to fix it, but we can pretty easily communicate that the reason we follow Jesus is for forgiveness, and then from there we need to try really hard to be good people, and that can end up in the ditch of self-righteousness. At the same time, I think maybe a little more often in our world and in our sort of evangelical reformed Christian world, we say things like, I'm a mess, I'm so aware of how significant my sin is, which is true, that it seems like there's nothing that can be done. I can't really change and grow. and we end up in this spot where we say Jesus has saved me, but there's no real hope for change. Tim Keller was able to talk about sin and apply the gospel to it in a way that neither led to self-righteousness nor to despair. That as you look at Jesus, as you deeply understand what he's done for you, he will actually lead you into change. Yes, it's slow and painful, but there's real change as we look to the real Jesus. Tim's strength was his ability to point out inconsistencies, strengths and weaknesses in various forms of thought, both secular and religious. One of Tim's greatest strengths was his ability to look at an issue, to point out sort of the standard poles, the polar opposite ways of approaching the issue, and then without simply picking a moderate view or without simply synthesizing the 2 points of view, Tim was able to point out the strengths and weaknesses in both poles and then show a better way, a gospel way, how the gospel both speaks to the strengths and weaknesses of each position and gives you an altogether different and better approach. And Tim was able to do that very, very consistently. I do lots of reading, both by temperament and enjoyment and by my training. This is a job that requires a decent amount of study and reading. And I think reading is really important. I think it's way, way underrated and underemphasized. And yet, I also think that preaching is terribly important. And for me as a pastor, I think I've learned the most of what I've learned from Tim Keller has been from his preaching, from listening to his preaching. So it's not necessarily simply about content, though that's true too. It's how Tim's preaching spoke to my heart, pointed me consistently to Jesus, and inflamed my love for the Savior. After all, that's what all of us most need. We need to know that we're loved by Jesus, and we need to love him in return. And Tim's preaching, among all the other things that it did for me as a pastor, it inflamed my heart as a child of God to want to know and love Jesus better. I'm really sad Tim is gone. I've spent a decent amount of time reflecting this week, and I am profoundly sad for me as a pastor in what has felt like a particularly challenging season these last couple years, personally, but also in our culture. Seeing Tim Keller out there, writing in the Atlantic, being quoted on MSNBC, him out there ahead of me, speaking wisely, warmly, winsomely. It was a great boon to my own ministry and my own soul. There's someone out there talking about Jesus, but also talking like Jesus with clarity and strength, but also kindness and grace. And for him not to be out there in front of us, it makes ministry feel more lonely than ever. However, the reason that Tim is no longer out on the path in front of us is because he's rounded the last bend. He is profoundly delighted by meeting Jesus face to face. And because Tim's ministry, the hallmark of his ministry was always to set his own eyes on Jesus, and he did with great wisdom late in his life. Now, right, with him being with Jesus and out of this earthly travel, it's a reminder that each of us always needs to set our eyes on Jesus. And we put our eyes on all the wrong things, our counterfeit gods, and yet our greatest hope, our only hope, our best hope is always and only in Jesus. And Tim Keller taught me that again and again. For that, I am deeply grateful. Well, Cross Park, thank you for your time listening to this video today, watching this video. Hope it was encouraging to you. We look forward to seeing you Sunday morning at 9:30 for Sunday school and 10:30 for worship as we look at Psalm 122. You will note in the email I've included a number of links to podcasts and reflections by and about Tim Keller. Thanks for your time, Cross Park. We'll see you Sunday morning.